So this is Genesis chapter 41, the first 40 verses. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. I shouldn't identify with one of the cows. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. And then he fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 ears of corn, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other ears of corn sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin ears of corn swallowed up the 7 healthy full ears. And then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning, his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now, a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he'd shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." "I cannot do it," said Joseph to Pharaoh, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first. But even after they ate them, no one could tell they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. And then I woke up. In my dream I saw 7 ears of corn, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other ears sprouted, withered and thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin ears of corn swallowed up the 7 good ears. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me." Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of corn are 7 years. It is one and the same. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterwards are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless ears of corn scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt. but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials, so Pharaoh asked them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Wow. Excuse me. And our second reading, which is significantly shorter, is Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 23. And again, see if you can identify with one of the characters. You haven't got long because it's far fewer verses, so choose one fairly soon. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain." Sorry, I've just lost myself. "And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat and drink and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Do not worry." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothes." This is the word of God. Praise be to God.
The other day, our supermarket delivery had arrived, and it was the usual situation in our house: a sudden bounty of food and a slight feeling of panic I wouldn't find a place to store it all. As I was stocking the fridge, I started to wonder if it would all fit in, until I found myself trying to cram the broccoli into any last remaining space that I could find, and wondering if perhaps I needed another fridge to store all our food. And then I found myself wondering, am I just like the rich fool in Jesus' parable? You may be wondering what this has to do with the story of Joseph, but hopefully it will become clear. So far in Joseph's story up to this point, we've seen him imprisoned, kidnapped, enslaved, gain favour only to lose it, falsely accused, imprisoned again, gain favour again, but then forgotten. But every story has a turning point, and this is it. Everything so far in Joseph's story has been leading up to this moment. This is the crux of the story, the end of the hardship for Joseph and the beginning of redemption. From this point on, the trajectory is upward. Joseph, seemingly single-handedly, saves not only himself, but Pharaoh and the whole of Egypt and all of his family from starvation through foresight and careful resource management. When I was asked to do this talk, I was struck by some similarities between this part of Joseph's story and the parable that Jesus told of the rich fool. And in the picture on the left, you can see Rembrandt's version of the rich fool counting up all his possessions. And on the right is some archaeological evidence of ancient grain silos, probably like the ones that they used in Egypt to store the grain. So, at first glance, the rich fool's strategy seems to be the same as the one that God suggests to Joseph. Egypt has an abundance of food, and so does the rich fool. Joseph stores the food, and so does the rich fool. But Joseph is vindicated, and the rich fool is condemned for using the same strategy. God sends dire warnings to Egypt, but Jesus tells people not to worry. Why? Let's look at the rich fool first. His land had yielded an abundant crop. Because he was rich, he probably had a lot of land and people to work for him. He would most likely be a millionaire in today's society. And he saw this abundance almost as a problem. What shall I do? He says. His solution is to build bigger barns and leave his harvest in it so that he can relax and party. We sense that he is smug and self-important, selfish and greedy. He's thinking to himself, I did it all myself. I get to keep it all myself. I deserve it. I'm worth it. I can now relax. There was no plan for his stored grain. It simply sat there, and when he died, it went to waste. So what about Joseph's story? How is this different? So I've looked at 4 differences between the 2 stories. The first difference is that there are signs to show that Joseph's plan is clearly from God. Pharaoh has 2 strange dreams, 7 fat cows, followed by and devoured by 7 gaunt ones. 7 healthy heads of grain, followed by and consumed by 7 measly ones. There's a clue here to the reader that the dreams are not just random nightmares. They are actually divinely inspired. There are 7 of each organism in both dreams. 7 is the number that represents completeness and perfection, holy. In other words, from God. Pharaoh knows that these are no ordinary dreams, but important visions with a meaning. Also, note that Joseph says in verse 32 that the dream was given in 2 forms to show that the matter has been firmly decided by God. In fact, all the dreams in Joseph's story come in pairs, a helpful reminder perhaps that to be certain that a word or picture is from God, it will be confirmed by another source. Second difference. In Joseph's story, the acknowledgement and glory is given to God. Pharaoh is disturbed and he wants answers. Not even the wisest amongst his advisors can interpret the dreams. But then the cupbearer remembers Joseph, who is brought before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says to Joseph, "I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." And Joseph's reply is important. He says, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." How easy it would have been for Joseph to take the credit for explaining the dreams. In fact, I wonder as a younger man in Canaan that he may have done. Instead, he points to God as the interpreter of the dreams. Joseph doesn't seek glory for himself. His experiences since Canaan have humbled him. He doesn't even put himself forward as the person to run the management of the grain storage. It is God who does the steering here. Pharaoh recognizes and publicly declares God's wisdom and guiding hand in Joseph, and then appoints him as his right man. Pharaoh says to Joseph, "Since God has made this known to you, there's no one as discerning and wise as you." There's a lesson for us here. Our first duty is to stay true to God, point out his goodness, and not push ourselves forward or put our own needs first. And this is really difficult. It's against our nature. It's normal, and some would say natural, to look after ourselves and those closest to us first. The rich fool did it, and I know that I do it. I think about my overfull fridge, and yet again today I have forgotten to bring some food for the Monday Food Club. Putting God first may lead to hardship, as it did for Joseph when his upright behaviour towards Potiphar and his wife landed him up in prison. We cannot always see why we go through hardships when we put God first. But sometimes, as in Joseph's case, all our previous experiences and encounters can sometimes lead us up to being the right person in the right place at the right time. We have the benefit of looking back in hindsight, and we can see that God's faithfulness is throughout Joseph's life. But he had to wait many, many years to see it fulfilled, and so it can be with us. In fact, we might never know the impact we have for being faithful to God, even in the most difficult of circumstances. And this is a really tough challenge. The third difference. The plan is to benefit everybody and not just the rich few. The dreams foretell of 7 years of bumper harvest, overwhelming plenty, followed by 7 years of famine so dreadful that the good years would all be forgotten. Without the foreknowledge that God gives Pharaoh through the dreams, it would have been tempting for the Egyptians to squander their bounty in lazy, rich living, probably wasting most of the food. And then they would have starved in the years that followed. The rich fool was doing it selfishly for himself. He wasn't thinking ahead of other people. He just wanted to party and relax now. Pharaoh, on the other hand, is told in verse 36 to hold the food in reserve for the whole country so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. This knowledge is not just for the privileged few. It's a national strategy to sustain the whole population through the famine. Fourth difference. The plan is not extravagant, but it is enough. Joseph's plan is to only store 1/5 of the produce from the bumper years in a national scheme so that there's food enough for the famine. Notice it's only 1/5. It doesn't say why, but maybe it was calculated to be just enough. The rich fool puts all his food into barns for no apparent purpose. So, to summarise the differences. Firstly, there are signs to show that the plan is clearly from God. The acknowledgement and the glory is given to God. The plan is to benefit everyone, not just the rich few. And the plan is not extravagant, it is just enough. However, there is more to the story than just a rescue plan for one nation. There were a lot of famines in the Mediterranean cultures during the late Bronze Age. And in fact, archaeologists believe that famine was one of the major causes for the abrupt disappearance of several civilizations, and it's known as the Bronze Age collapse. So why was Egypt at this point in time special? The famine didn't just save the people of Egypt. People from other nations got word of the food, and among them Joseph's own family, as we will see in a later part of the story. Joseph's family was the embryo nation of Israel, God's chosen people to bring his blessing upon the world. And ultimately, that blessing was fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ, who was a direct descendant of Joseph's brother Judah. So Christians today can be deeply thankful for those strange dreams of a Pharaoh long ago. God's faithfulness to Joseph was a blessing to him. But through this, Joseph was called to be a blessing to those around him and also to future generations. This is how God works. He's faithful to us so we can be a blessing to others. How wrong the rich fool was. If only he'd shared his bumper harvest with others rather than keeping it to himself and letting it go to waste. So, what about us today? Maybe it's always been the case, but to me, it does feel like we're living in a world with an increasingly uncertain future. The world political order is changing, and the modern world is likely to increasingly experience food shortages caused by many things: political instability, a rising population, increasingly unpredictable climate, insect population decline, and severe topsoil loss. Today's farmers are already struggling to provide our food. Now, you might love him, you might hate him, but Jeremy Clarkson's Clarkson Farm TV series actually highlights the difficulty that farmers are having with unpredictable weather. Also, this statistic from UNESCO I find pretty shocking, that since the mid-1990s, the top 1% richest people took 38% of all the additional wealth accumulated, whereas the bottom half of the world only captured 2% of it. And then also the picture at the bottom is meant to highlight that we have an epidemic of loneliness in this world. So how do we, who live in one of the richest nations of the world, blessed with abundance, use that abundance to become a blessing to those around us, in other nations and to future generations? And how do we seek God's guidance and leading? Well, first we can pray, and we're going to do that at the end of the talk. And then we can think about what we individually are blessed with and thank God for this and acknowledge that all good things come from him. And then we can think about how we can use this blessing to bless others. So there are obviously many ways that we are blessed differently, and there's many ways we can use that blessing. These pictures just highlight some of the things that are happening in our church and community already. So you might be financially blessed. How about investing your money in initiatives such as Green Pastures, which use money to invest in housing for those who have none? Perhaps you have plenty of food in your cupboards. Then share some of it with the Monday Food Club that distributes it to those that need it. Maybe you're rich in time. Perhaps you could volunteer for something like Bath City Pastas, or maybe one of the holiday clubs that's happening over the summer. Or perhaps you're good at befriending people. Perhaps you can spend some time with a lonely neighbour, or take part in one of the initiatives to bring people together in this community. Maybe you've got a garden. Can you manage it for the benefit of nature so that nature can be preserved for future generations? Perhaps you do all of this and more, and I know many of you do. Or perhaps you're not rich in time or money. Perhaps life is just tough, and too tough to devote to something new. Or maybe think about the things that you do in your daily life, what you spend your money on. Does the food you buy help to heal the soil or harm it? Do the organisations that you purchase things from pay a living wage or keep people in virtual slavery? What about your leisure activities? Are you aiming to leave this planet in better condition than you found it, or are you damaging it for your own enjoyment? But perhaps none of this resonates with you because you're just stuck in a really difficult situation, and you actually identify much more with the parts of Joseph's story where he was sold as a slave or in prison. Hold on to hope that even in this, God is with you and working out his purposes, even though most of the time it doesn't feel like it. So, in everything that you do, and it will be different for each of us, remember these key principles from the stories that we heard today. God calls the person who stores things only for themselves a fool. God's plan involves the flourishing of all humanity, not just a wealthy few. God might have put you in the right place at the right time, even though you may be suffering hardship. And plans work best when God is leading the way. We're just going to spend a moment of silence now, spending time thinking to God about how he's blessed us and how we can use it. And I'll end it with a little prayer. Lord God, we thank you for all the ways that you've blessed us as individuals and a church and a community. We thank you that those blessings come from you. And we ask you now to show us if there are any ways that we can use those blessings to help others around us. Amen.